If I have lost my child, for example, to a childhood cancer, the goal of my grieving is not to let go and relinquish that relationship, to withdraw emotional energy from that, the process that Freud called decathexis, in order to invest in another relationship. The goal is to find a sustainable way of continuing a bond, rather than separating it. Bond is verbinding. Okay. So in this then, we move toward a kind of acknowledgement of the finality of death, not just intellectually, right? It is not simply a robotic kind of emotionless recognition. It is a full-bodied, emotional acknowledgement of the reality of the loss that does not require a kind of tense avoidance of that reality. The reality seeps into us, it informs us, it shapes us. But it shapes us without that kind of terrible fear that leads to avoidance. We continue to experience what we would call bittersweet emotions, right? Maybe they begin as a kind of deep despair and a kind of angst, right? And we feel just reduced by them. But we find ways then of staying in the same affective range or zone, but carrying those emotions more lightly. So perhaps despair becomes a kind of nostalgia, a kind of sweet remembrance, accompanied by a gentle tear instead of deeply racking sobs of pain. We change our mental representation of the deceased or that kind of role or status that we once had. Right? In the case of the loss of a loved one, right? We're looking for ways of maybe no longer can we sit down and have breakfast with our loved one each day and set the table for two, right? Now, from the point of her death forward, I'm setting the table only for one, because I will be having breakfast each day from this point forward with her very present absence, the chair that calls her forth, but never palpably, never physically, never substantially enough. Eternity will not return her in this physical form to me. Coming to find peace with that, and even appreciation for the way in which she is with me now, is part of the process of integrating loss. We construct a coherent narrative of the loss. And this is true with reference to all fundamental life transitions, especially of a traumatizing kind. Right? That is to say, by seeking a coherent narrative, we are not just looking for a happy story, a kind of what in English we might call positive reframing, right? Like putting a big yellow happy face sticker over the mask of grief, right? It's not that kind of story we're seeking to tell. Mostly in the work that I do, I'm listening for the implicit need that the person has. I'm asking myself at each moment, what does this person need deeply at a level that's expressed in their language, but often is also there beneath their language, right? I can see Trisha's terrible need for time out from this grief that is killing her. But I can also respect the great importance of maintaining access to that grief. And then I ask myself, in the presence of this need, is she ready for this step? In session 1 and 2, the answer was not yet. Not yet. The grief just needs a voice. No attempt to down-regulate it, put it away. Let's just give it the space it desires. But by session 3, there was more of a sense of readiness. So where Grief Street crosses Readiness Boulevard, if you can find yourself at that intersection, you can explore a lot of different directions of movement. And so at each point in therapy, in coaching, I'm listening for those two things to come together. And then a simple suggestion like this one, or like the idea of not having to grieve for her daughter 24/7, could be accepted very readily. And the tragedy of human life is that we are wired for attachment in a world of impermanence. As the Buddhists remind us, all things, all people, all projects, all words will rise up and fall away. We need to find some way of integrating that reality, not just getting over it. Because there's no getting over it. There's only getting through it and preparing ourselves for the next experience in the transition cycle, the next welcome, the next investment, the next growing attachment, intimacy, the inevitable loss, grief, meaning reconstruction that prepares us then for the next encounter. Right? This is the nature of life, as they have beautifully laid out in this recent book.